So welcome to Crossing the Line, the Passport Reimagined Artist Panel 2 with Ben Blount, Shana Agid, Sandra Fernandez, and Mare Blocker. Curated by Catherine Alice Michaelis, this exhibition will be on display here until February 23rd and then travel on to other locations around the country, with the next stop being the San Francisco Center for the Book. Today, each artist will give an overview of their work and process, and then Catherine will moderate a conversation with the group. There will be time for audience questions at the end, and everyone's encouraged to stay for the reception in the bistro afterwards. Also, the exhibition catalog is for sale through the museum store just out in the bistro area as well. So Catherine Alice Michaelis, our curator, has been exploring what an artist book can be for over 30 years. She works with antique printing presses, movable type, and any printable medium she finds, primarily on themes of nature. Catherine works with scientists, writers, visual artists, and musicians to make edition print work. She has been collected by over 100 public institutions, and she was featured in the PBS series Craft in America in the Nature episode in 2017. Catherine has curated national and international artist book shows. Let's welcome her.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you, everyone, for coming. This means so much. All of it. I probably tear up a few times to be able to put on an exhibition like this in this amazing space and museum, all this support, all these great people. It's just fantastic, and I'm glad you're here. So I don't know, it's been a little over a year now since Cynthia and I invited a dozen artists to be inspired by passports and travel documents to create works. And so these 12 artists were commissioned, and then I gathered 18 more titles from the collection to fill out the show. I hope you've all seen it upstairs in the Sherry Grover Gallery. And I hope for everyone that there's work that connects to your personal story on any of the themes of belonging, identity, travel, immigration, and the journeys of your ancestors. As Jenna mentioned, the exhibition will be traveling. It's so exciting. It'll be gathering its own passports. It's going to 4 other locations, and each catalog at each location has its own little passport stamp. So if you want to travel and see the exhibition in these other spaces, know that the catalog will have its different passport stamp inside. I want to thank Laura Zander, who's here, who designed the catalog and photographed all the titles, and Valerie Peterman, who filmed all the books from cover to cover so you could view them on the screen that's up in the Sherry Grover Gallery. I want to thank Myrna Ogland and Christy Heath for their support of the exhibition and the catalog, and also especially thank Tangam Chandrasekharan, who's here in the audience with us. She wrote a fabulous essay about her own personal story that's in the catalog, so you can meet and talk with her during the reception. Also in the audience today is Carletta Carrington-Wilson. She's over here. She is also one of the commissioned passport artists, and she was on our panel in October. And if you weren't here in October, that video is online on the BIMA YouTube channel, and it was really a fantastic event, and you'll know because you'll be here for this fantastic event and want to see the other one. So anyway, without waiting any longer, what I'm going to do is introduce each artist one at a time. They'll come up, as Jenna mentioned, and present, and then at the end we'll all come up and sit on the stage together. So first up is Ben Blount. He's from Detroit. He's an artist, designer, and letterpress printer who loves books, typography, and putting ink on paper. He is best known for work that explores questions of race, identity, and the stories we tell ourselves about living in America. When I think about what it means to be an active community member, I think about Ben. Now I tear up. He's positive, passionate, and caring, and it comes through in what he prints. I aspire to that. Ben was also on the fall panel, and he was also part of our Dog Ear Festival. We did a Zoom panel online for people, and that's also on BIMA's YouTube list, so you can see more of him there. I also want to bring attention to the unfair share gerrymandered chocolate bar. Ben produced these with a friend whose name I forgot. And it's really amazing. It says the gerrymandered chocolate bar, easy to enjoy, hard to share. It's 100% unjust. And it raises money for organizations that are working to work against gerrymandering. And I asked him to bring some of these. The chocolate is really, really delicious. So if you want one, you can talk to Ben during the reception. They're really good. Anyway, so that's probably all I should say about Ben. Over to you. Let's welcome Ben.
Thank you, Catherine. That was so nice. There we go. My book is Passportal. I just want to say thank you for coming and being a part of this talk. I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Catherine and Cynthia and everyone who's been involved in this wonderful project. I'm going to talk a little bit about my book. When I first got the email from Catherine that they're looking for books about passports and migration and people moving across the country, I had an immediate idea because my mother had been cleaning out stuff in her house and came across this letter from my great aunt, my Auntie Rep. And it tells the story of my family's migration from Arkansas to Oklahoma in 1900. And so it was the perfect timing for doing something creative with this book. And this is a story that's not just my story, but the stories of millions of other African Americans. The Great Migration, where 6 million African Americans moved from the South to the North, either for new economic opportunities, but also often to escape from racialized violence, from the horrors of lynching and Jim Crow. So it's a larger story, but also a personal story and a story of a lot of Black families that I know. In fact, my wife, her family has a similar story, and she has this article that she found telling the story of her family in 1890 moving from a mining town in Alabama to Indian Territory. This was her great-grandmother's first husband, James Herring, who had an altercation with a white man, and instead of running, decided to fight back. So he and his nephew were armed and were going to stand up for themselves, and were actually shot from a distance, from a window, by white men. So they died with their weapons. So after they were dead, their families were in danger. So their family left in the middle of the night to go to Mobile, Alabama, and move to Indian Territory, which is similar to my family's story. So this is a story that resonates at a personal level, but a larger story of America. So my book is based on this story, this letter from my great aunt. So I thought I'd read the first page of the story to you, just so you can get an idea of my inspiration. Your father, your Auntie May, and myself was born in the state of Arkansas. Your Aunt Odessa and Helen Josephine was born in Oklahoma. The family moved to what is now the state of Oklahoma in 1900, 76 years ago this month. Your father, Auntie May, and myself came on the train, or rather traveled by train. Your grandfather and one of your grandfather's nephews, Moses Collins, came by land. There were no highways or even good gravel roads all the way, so your grandfather rode, who was called the lead horse, following a compass, blazed a road across fields and streams, camping at nights. All household goods were on a wagon drawn by 2 horses. Just before they got to the state line, so your grandmother said, a Caucasian, or white man, came into their camp for the night. He said he noticed the peckerwood, that's what we called the poor ones, looking around as they fixed supper and prepared to hunk down for a night. And sometimes before day, he sneaked up, stole your grandfather's horse, lead horse, bridle and saddle, and took off. When his nephew arose the next morning, the horse was gone. In those days, they had lawmen called marshal, usually USA men. This Peckerwood misjudged your grandfather. He did not know he was a Bryant. So the rest of the story, they actually do get their horse back, but this is the story of them traveling across the country. And they had to leave the area because as the young girls in the family were getting older, the white men in the town were kind of looking at them through different eyes, and they knew they were unsafe, so they had to leave town to protect the girls. So it's, again, a family story from my life, but it resonates larger. So to go with this family story, I wrote a fictionalized Afrofuturist story of my family 125 years in the future, leaving Oklahoma to go north because of violence and because of a water shortage. So there's a story from 1900, a true story, and a story that I wrote from 2150. So there are parallels. So there's a picture of my great-grandfather, Pearson Bryant, on this passport document, and then there's one in the future, and I used my daughter's photo as a reference for that one. In 1900, they went across the country on horseback and horse-drawn carriage. In the future, I was thinking about Cuba and how they have lots of old cars that they've just kind of kept running, that maybe in the future, because motorbikes don't have all the computers and technical things that we have, that cars have, and they're easy to fix, maybe there'll be caravans of motorbikes going across the country to escape. So this is the book opened. It's a small passport-sized book with a wrapper. So when it opens, this is the kind of document section. So there's a picture of my great-grandfather and a stamped with a stylized flag. And you can see it's a gatefold, so it opens up to tell the larger story. And this is the spread of the futuristic story with a different stylized US flag and an image of the motorbike. In the back of the book, there's a pocket where there's an actual copy of the letter, the first 2 pages of the letter, so that you could read the letter for yourself and see the beautiful handwriting. So this is the package as it comes together. A few behind the scenes thing. I was trying to figure out how to make this package come together and not just be a simple passport looking object. So shout outs to my friend Aaron Sweeney, who sent me a bunch of models of how this thing could fold and kind of come together. So I was looking at those for reference and inspiration. There's a bunch of mock-ups on the left, trying to figure out the right size and hand feel. You can also see in the back of the black wrapper, there is Tyvek that was dyed in indigo. Of course, there's a history of indigo in Asia, but also a rich tradition of indigo dyeing in Africa. And so I wanted something that had that historical connection, but also a handmade feel. I didn't want it just to feel like an official document. So that's more handmade. There's an artist, Tony Williams of Ohio, who showed us about the indigo dyeing, so I wanted to get that more organic feel to the piece as well. And then on the right, you can see the jig I used to place the photos. So the photos are tipped onto the paper, and then I printed on top of those. This is a poster from an organization in Evanston, where I live, called Shorefront Legacy Center. They find and keep the history of Black people along the North Shore of Illinois. It's a nonprofit organization. I did a poster for their 25th anniversary. It's a pretty cool looking poster, metallic silver ink on black paper, but if you look at the very bottom, it says Evanston, Illinois, and not Evanston, Illinois. And so I have a stack of these posters with typos, so I thought, Our History, Our Future really worked well with this book, and I thought of if you had to leave town quickly, maybe you would grab your documents and wrap them up in paper or a rag or something, and so I thought the wrapper was a good idea to kind of take a nod to just leaving everything not being perfect, so using something that already existed, maybe you'd rip the top off a piece of paper, wrap it around your document, stick it in your bag and go. And so that was taken from this poster that I printed a year prior to that worked and just kind of came together to work with this project. That's my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. And now I'm going to introduce Shana Agid. Shana is an artist, designer, teacher, and organizer whose work focuses on relationships of power and difference in visual, social, and political cultures. Shana is Associate Professor of Arts, Media, and Communication at Parsons School of Design, a 2024-26 Fellow at Interrupting Criminalization. And I don't know what that is, I'm so curious. And a longtime member of Critical Resistance. It was a delight to meet Shana last year in New York, and I'm so glad that they could come out and join us here on this panel. So please give a warm welcome to Shana Agid. There's a clicker if you want.
Amazing. I'm just going to leave it on Ben's slides because they're great. Thank you all so much for being here, and I have a feeling we'll all be thanking everybody over and over again, but I just want to thank everyone at BIMA for making this possible, and Catherine for seeking out bookwork and then also showing it to us for the last couple of days. This has been like the most delightful time, and Cynthia for really wanting to collect it, which is amazing. So I'm going to start by reading. I'll save just really quickly, there's a framework for the book that I'll talk about, which is this refrain I learned, and I'll talk about what that means, but just so you know it when you hear it. And this is from the first page of the first book. I learned it was queers and artists who made the uniforms and the plan to impersonate the police, slip into the records bureau, and set fire to the identification cards. They did this because forging documents wasn't enough when there were doubles. The fire would be put out late and with more water than needed because they also had friends in the fire brigade. I learned the woman who went into hiding, impersonating a man, learned that her comrades, including her friend who, quote, was very obvious, had been executed in the dunes. Before dying, he instructed history. Let it be known that homosexuals are not cowards. So when I got the email about this, I was like, 100%, I cannot wait to do this. This is so exciting. And then I proceeded to misread the due date. I'm just going to be very frank. Catherine knows this story. And I was in a very busy, demanding job at the time, and it was going to end at a particular period. And then I was like, I'm going to have 3 months to think about this book. It's going to be so great. What a great way to transition out of this job. And then I learned that the deadline was a few months earlier than I thought. And I went into a complete and total panic. And I had so many ideas, and I'll talk about this at the very end, but what felt most striking to me was that the prompt that Catherine had given us was so rich and so slippery in a good way that I couldn't figure out where to stick a pin to be able to begin going. And so I got lucky and went to the Film Forum, which anyone in New York knows is the best place to see a movie and also has the best popcorn in New York, and saw a film that I did not know was going to be 4.5 hours with an intermission, but it turned out was, called Occupied City by Steve McQueen. And that is where I learned the story that I just told you. And so part of what came to pass was that as I sat down to work on this, I started thinking about the work that happens when documents get made. And I started thinking about this both from a very personal perspective, which I'll talk about in a second, and from a political perspective and a sort of social perspective. And what I ultimately ended up making, which you can see in the photograph here, is a book that is 3 books. The books are Bodies, Land, Water, and Forge. And the books are a combination of handset type with writing that is written or assembled by me. A lot of it is actually writing that is pulled from other places. And pressure prints that are made from paper plates. It's a process that I will not take 10 of my 10 minutes to explain because I'm really bad at explaining it. Essentially is a process using pressure, ink, and paper to create images. And what I determined to do was to make a book that included the matrix from which the book was made. And this was my way of trying to begin to grapple with the idea that these documents are simultaneously meant to be theoretically unique to us that we are made to carry, while simultaneously, and usually in that uniqueness, producing either some danger or some security for us, or both sometimes. But also that the idea that they are unique and necessary is itself a forgery. And so this was the thing I was sort of trying to get at in the book. So on the left, what you can see here is also do, in fact, pay attention to this if you plan to travel at all. Really quite soon, you will need to have a real ID if you are traveling from the United States in order to cross many, many borders. A real ID apparently makes you your real ID self. And on the right, what you see is my passport. And besides the fact that it's not a flattering picture, because I mean you can take your glasses off, what you'll see down in the bottom is that my sex is F, and that is a choice. I was born and assigned female at birth. I identify as trans, but I don't identify as male or female. For folks who don't know, you actually can, in some areas, get an X designation now on your passport. But for political reasons, I've chosen never to identify in any official documents as male, even though generally I'm read as male. Which means that what happens when I go to the airport is that I have to go back and forth between sort of passing as female and passing as male to get in and out of different spaces. And so part of what I was thinking about in making this book was that as a white middle-class person who has the benefit of a lot of education and class privilege, and as a US citizen, that I have an incredible amount of privilege in moving around in the world, and yet I have this one sort of component that always makes me potentially a little bit unsafe. And so it's one of the things that I was always thinking about in the work that I was doing, and this book is sort of thinking about those borders. So as I began to work through this, one of the things that I wanted to really sort of talk about, or use the book to talk about, was the ways in which this construction of borders is really a social construction with violent impacts on people's lives. And this is just a quick example, these next 3 slides, of how I sort of built these references together. So what you're looking at now is a design proposal for a so-called beautiful border on the southern border of the United States with Mexico that becomes beautiful by hiding the fact that it is, in fact, a huge gap in the ground that is impassable. And so, as you can see from the images, the idea is to create a visual seamlessness that hides the very mechanism that makes it impossible to cross a border that is itself militarized. It uses a technology, a sort of visual technology that is called a ha-ha, that makes it so you can see across but not see what's down, which is a visual technology that also Thomas Jefferson used in the design of several parts of Charlottesville, Virginia, along with these serpentine walls that you can see at the top here, which were on the University of Virginia campus, that hid the quarters where enslaved people who both built and ran the school, in many regards, were sort of literally hidden behind. And so the image that you see on the bottom that also inspired what you'll see on the next page, the next slide, is the image of a memorial to the enslaved laborers at the University of Virginia that is trying to talk about what it meant that there are these architectural sleights of hand that hide the work and the lives of thousands and thousands of enslaved people. And so in making the book, one of the things I wanted to do is to begin to think about how these materials themselves, and I'm thinking with a lot of scholars and other artists and activists who are doing this work, but how the materials themselves begin to create what we think of and understand as borders, and then begin to accept almost without knowing it at times as common sense, right? We must have a wall there, we must have a gap there, we must have a passage through which people have to go. And so this is the plate, as you can see from the last of the books, for a page so it's printed from that, but I also designed the plates knowing they would go into the book to be not aesthetically horrible, which the plates totally could be because normally you would never see them. So this is sort of imitating those 2 sleights of hand. And this is what that's not the print of that, but that's what the pressure prints look like. So the plates and the prints were sort of made from these ideas, and they're abstracted and imagined. They're trying in some ways maybe to be an articulation of the common sense and also the possibility of deconstructing those common sense by looking at sort of what they're made of. So in thinking about this, one of the things that I wanted to be able to do was begin to imagine the role that bodies play and respond to the idea that as many times as our bodies are made to move through these kind of passages or portals, our bodies themselves actually get called upon to do a work of either reproducing the border or exceeding the border or the border's expectations in some way. So I'm going to read one more short excerpt from the book, which begins, I learned, bodies exceed expectations. Bodies can be conditioned to cross, to hide, to become objects of transport, and vessels in and of themselves. I learned my body's privileges sometimes outweigh its risks, but I have a shirt I wear for travel that could be hiding breasts or not, in case anyone is looking. I learned in a world that kills people with bombs. So this book, to me, feels like it's trying to hold, as I said at the beginning, something that feels so slippery. The systems and the violences, the conditions and experiences that shape bounded things, right? The bodies, the nations that we imagine have to be contained. And these things slide into each other. I talk about them in the book as spaces that are built for familiar violence that's repeated over generations. And oftentimes the buildings that are actually referred to in the book really are buildings that were used for one kind of violence, then another era, another kind of violence, and then another kind of violence, so that begins to be held in the history of the place as well. So the book is, I hope, a kind of other argument. It's maybe a way of excavating some of those ideas and some of those histories, but it's also, I think, made from a place of, to be totally honest, anger and rage, and a real sense of clarity that the ways that we exceed these things are by living them and living through them differently. It is ultimately a book about the things that I was taught, both by my privileges and also by my moments of vulnerability, and the ways that the unlearning of those privileges has been endemic to being able to understand and the systems that would grant me life and other people death. So I'll close with the final page of the book, which reads, I learned. On arrest, a person known to provide people with the right papers had his computer seized, along with his workshop. The police used his Photoshop files as evidence, layers, fabrication, forging. He said, forgery is what the state does. I learned they told them they could stay. I learned let them eat grass. I learned the men carved up the land which was not theirs over a glass of sherry. I learned history does not simply repeat itself. I learned some never made it, but more of us did than is often assumed. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Shana. Okay, we're gonna keep moving on. Sandra Fernandez is next. She's an Ecuadorian American artist whose work vividly captures her experiences with migration and gender over a 25-year artistic career. Her pieces are part of prestigious collections, including those of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Library of Congress, and of course here at BIMA. So her work has just been always deeply admired when it's on exhibition, and so it's really exciting to have her here today to meet and talk to you all. Sandra Fernandez.
Good afternoon. It is wonderful to be here surrounded by amazing, talented artists and also by so many supporters of the arts. So thank you for being here. I would like to thank Cynthia and Catherine for inviting me to be part of this wonderful project. Also would like to thank Cherie, that I don't think she's here, Jenna for all their support with the logistics of this visit, Laura for the amazing photos and catalog, to the VI Museum also, and to everybody else that was involved. Oh, I'm still in Shana's. I'm sorry. When Cynthia invited me to participate in the creation of a book about migration, I was immediately interested, and even more when she brought up the idea of passports. As passports have been, as passports are a document that have defined who I am in many ways. I was born in New York, grew up in Ecuador, and came back to the United States as a young adult, and have been traveling and moving around to many countries. In thinking more closely about my theme, I knew I wanted to address my mother's journey of migration and my origins. I gathered all the elements that I had collected between old photos, notes, and documents from the years when she arrived in the United States to my birth. I even traveled to visit my mom in Ecuador, wishing to gather more elements for my book. And this is during the time that I was preparing the book. She unearthed and shared with me letters between her and my grandfather during those hard years when she was away. Since that visit, and upon my return to my studio, I encountered a lot of pain that I didn't know what to do with. It took me a few, I'm sorry, I'm losing my space here. It took me a few months to digest it all and to sit down and make the layout for the book. My conversation with her around the letters brought up sentiments, many sentiments that I hadn't even known about. Emotions that had been transferred to me in the womb. And I learned about the difficulties that she faced being alone in a new country, falling in love, getting pregnant, and being abandoned, and the rest that followed. So I finally designed the book, had all the pieces mapped out, and started the production. I printed various layers of color. The images were not coming out sharp. The colors were not blending. It was just not working. The book was supposed to be an homage to my mom, and it was looking like a terrible collection of mistakes. To make the story short, I did give up. I gave up. I made a first version that I stopped working on halfway through. The copy in the museum is the second version of the book. I finally figured out that it was not working because I was full of anger, and this anger was translating into a very resentful and ugly book. Luckily, I realized this and stopped on time and decided to start from the beginning. And it was not too long before the upcoming deadline to submit the finished book. Passportos, A Journey Inscribed, delves into the deeply personal and transformative journey of my mother's migration from Ecuador to the United States in the mid-60s. This work focuses on the symbolic and literal significance of her passport, an artifact marking the beginning of my family's odyssey. Excuse me, Jenna, there was a video before this one? It didn't. Oh. Okay, it's all right. So it's an artifact marking the beginning of my family's odyssey and the intricate web of choices shaping our destiny. Her decision, though seemingly singular, set the course for generations to come, weaving a complex narrative of identity, belonging, and resilience. Let me just look quickly. Okay. So when you are looking at the book, it comes in a format that is page by page. And this was the video about. So when you're actually reading the book, you are taking out the pages and creating this sort of password and lining up the pages to create what you see here. And it becomes a narrative that has a beginning and an end. So if you look at the top, it begins with my mother's origins, when she was young, the family, and then her decision to migrate to the United States. Her passport is actually her real passport, and those stamps on the right, on the top right, are the date that she arrived, and then later at the bottom is the date that she returns back to Ecuador. And then in the middle is all the everything that she went through, not knowing the language, working in cleaning houses at night in in offices, then meeting some people, then meeting my father, then my father's mother getting in the way, and then them separating, and then my mother getting pregnant, and then all these very hard things that happen in between, and those are reflected by little notes and little nuances that are embedded on each of the pages. And then there I am, I'm born, and then she decides to return to her country, home country, to Ecuador. So we go back, and then the family embracing us, and then going. So I grew up in Ecuador. I'm 1 year old, and then when I'm 3 years old, my mom decides to send me back to the United States to meet my father all by myself. So all these, all these little things that are happening I'm trying to represent them in the book without being too narrative, I guess. But at the end, it's a story, right? So this is the whole thing. This is the whole book when you open it up. So through this book, I am to capture the essence of her journey, the hopes and fears, the losses and gains, and the enduring impact of her migration. Each section of the book reflects on the emotional and psychological landscapes navigated along the way. Oh, I'm totally out of order because of that one slide. I'm so sorry that I'm going back and forth. So I invite the viewers to contemplate broader themes of migration, destiny, and the invisible threads connecting us to our past and future. Early on, we were talking with the group about generational trauma. So, those are trying to bring in all those things, how things impact your life going back from many generations, and how that comes down to your life and to the life of your children. This book is an homage to my mother's bravery and a reflection on how the choices of one generation reverberate through the lives of those that follow. After I finished the book, I went back to Ecuador and I showed my mother. This is my mom. She's turning 89 this year, and I wanted to show her the results of the book, and it was so beautiful to. Oops. Sorry. To see her going through this book, and she teared up because for her it was a story that she pushed back. It was so endearing and so painful that she pushed it back, and part of it when I was talking to her and she was telling me about these letters, part of it came out, and then to see the book, it was like the best gift I could get. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think everyone who has shared about their piece in the collection on this theme, it's been so emotional. So last but not least, we have Seattle native Mare Blocker. She's been making limited edition and unique books and prints since 1976 when she established, and she established the M. Kimberly Press in 1984. I'm going to put my glasses on. Her work can be found in many public and private collections worldwide. I'm excited to share that Mare will also be having a solo show here at BIMA in the Sherry Grover Gallery opening in October of this year, so please come back for that. I first met Mare when I began printing about 35 years ago, and I can tell you that no other printer in the Pacific Northwest has been more of an inspiration to printers and artists of all stripes. Let's welcome Mare Blocker.
I wasn't thinking I was going to start crying, but thanks, Catherine. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Oops, wrong direction. Okay, so let's see if I can turn this on. No. Oh, yeah? In 2023, I started learning how to be a scuba diver. And for those of you that know me, I am escape. I am now slideshow. Geez, Mare. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so for those of you that know me, I am an open water swimmer and a lap swimmer. I've been a lifeguard coach and a swim coach. I competed in long distance swimming until I turned 40. And after my husband Buzz died, I decided to try and scuba dive, which is something I always wanted to do. And I thought, okay, it's dangerous, but what do I have to lose? So I feel really good about being able to get certified. And when Catherine and Cynthia asked me to do the passport, I thought, well, I'm going to do a Seahorse Kingdom passport. And it's been my goal in my scuba diving adventures to find a seahorse. I have not been able to find a seahorse yet. I keep thinking, oh, this is the day, but I haven't done it. And then when I got certified, you know how sometimes you're learning something new and you think, I'm gonna learn how to be a diver, but you don't really know exactly what it is you're gonna learn, right? Sometimes you learn, when you're learning something new, you learn something about yourself. And for me, the scuba diving was really about being confident in my body, being confident with where I'm at right now. But also the scuba diving was kind of like a dual passport between land and sea. And then when I started researching, so I did this Do-si-do book. When I started researching seahorses, their scientific name is Hippocampus Hippocampus. And we also have our hippocampus in our brain is like our brain's card catalog or index on time traveling and traveling through our memories in our brain. And that specifically is of interest to me because the same year Buzz died, my mom died of Lewy body dementia. And I have all her brain scans, and they're fascinating. And I have done a lot of research on memory, and so it's about the two seahorses in my brain that live right here, as well as scuba diving. This is the scuba diving side, and it's I started with pages that I was drawing outlines of plant forms, the shadows of plants in Bonaire. I went to Bonaire, which is a small island off the coast of Venezuela, last January and last October, so that's why I wasn't here for the opening. But I did plant shadows, and then I painted the pages with disregard of the flowers and painted them in watercolor. So my book is a one of a kind. There's a couple digital copies floating around. I've been experimenting with that lately. I codified the text on there. I used my mom's typewriter from her high school days, found a new ribbon. And the gold foil papers are the dives I did. The silver are the snorkels. And the paper is super fragile, gluing it down, which for me was spoke about the fragility of memory as well as the fragility of the coral. And just one of the examples, I went snorkeling with a friend, and then later we went to this place called Pink Beach, and I was trying to document each dive for this book or snorkel, and I asked him about going to Pink Beach, and he was like, I didn't go to Pink Beach with you, you went with someone else. And I'm like, you're the only one on this island I know. Who did I go with? Anyway, so, that speaks about it sort of goes back and forth, the two sides of this book. This is this page spread is the rules for diving. When you get certified, there's a lot of book work involved in it. And I was very interested in the whole idea of entanglements in, there's all kinds of things about entanglements. But when you're diving, they stress you got to carry a knife because you're going to get in fishing line or whatever, and it's like you don't really see that when you're diving. There's not a lot of fishing line, at least where I was. And then the other side, this is a paper cut. It's a jelly print that I did as a paper cut. It's bubble wrap. And then I used one of my mom's MRIs to do a paper cut of her brain. And the little pattern that I used sort of reminds me of a coral pattern. In Bonaire, they have a lot of coral plantations that are artificial grids, and they're seeding or gluing polyps of coral onto the grids, and then the coral rebuilds itself. And so I have this network of patterning for how our neurological pathways work, and a lot of layering on the hippocampus brain side. This is a passport for the brain. There's a little seal in there that is a wax seal of a seahorse. And I can't even tell you how much I love the idea of having two seahorses in my brain. Just love that. What can I do to feed these seahorses? That's my new life mission. I'm also really into dictionaries. And as a visual learner, I like to think of those little pictures in the dictionaries. I like to think of the pictures as my first language and words as my second language. And so I have been cutting up dictionaries I did for this project. And there's a little poem in here that is about grieving. And I really felt like as learning to scuba dive, I came back into my own power. And, grief, everyone experiences grief differently. But for me, grief was an opportunity to reinvent myself in a way. And then you can see in this picture a little bit better that I used gold metallic paint on this side to mimic the gold paper I used on the other side. There's an underlying text here, and I think you can see it in this maybe the next thing. I wrote a text from a walk with my great niece, who is really a close buddy of mine. Even though she's 9, I spend a lot of time with her. And she was very close with Buzz, my late husband. And they used to go bird watching together when she was young. And she inherited his binoculars and his bird books. And so we frequently go bird watching at the Center for Urban Horticulture off of Lake Washington. And so the text behind these pages is I wrote in wax, or that masking fluid. Masking fluid, I wrote and on the page the transcripts from our diaries, from the walks. We record what we see. And she frequently is like, don't forget we saw a turtle. Don't forget we saw 2 paddle boarders. Don't forget we saw a robin. It's like, don't forget is the mantra of that. So it shows up in behind all these things. I painted on top of that rubber and then rubbed the rubber off of it. So there's little pictures of birds. There's also this one in the middle, the page in the middle spread is dogs from the dictionary. I'm a dog person, and it has the name of every dog I've ever owned. And then my current dog, Ollie, is in the top upper right corner. He's a Dalmatian, so he has gold polka dots. And then this is a poem I wrote and to go with this book. And the number of the passport is my diving certification number. And it's all about to grieve, to retrieve your power, to nest, to plant a seed, to plan, to watch, to love, to remember, and store memories before the loss. That's the other thing about the hippocampus, is that the earlier memories stay a lot longer than the older, or, the newest memories are the first to leave. And so how can we, do we reinforce those memories with repetition? Those things really interest me now because, I'm paranoid about getting Lewy body dementia, to tell the truth. So that's something I'm really thinking about. And I'm also thinking about how, as a storyteller, seahorses, I ended up this poem with the whole thing about the male seahorse spitting the seahorses out. And we're spitting our stories into the ocean. And then I wrote a little poem for the colophon page using dictionary pages. And I made, I don't know how many of these, ink blot paintings of seahorses for this book. Also maybe look like brains. This is one of the pages from the water side, all the dictionary of fish. And then I'm going to end up with, I went back to Bonaire in October and did an open water swim from one island to the next. And so at the top of this image is me swimming in the ocean. And I love to swim in the ocean, but I don't like to think of the huge animals below me, which is the antithesis of scuba diving, right? Because you're like, oh, look, there's a moray eel right in my face. What am I doing now? So this page was from the book. And then on maybe the second to my last dive, in October, I'm a beginner diver, so you're so focused on breathing and making sure you're safe in the water, and maybe you're looking at a few things, and you're interacting with sea turtles and all kinds of things. But I hadn't really turned around. Like, I'm so focused on making sure I know how to get back to the surface and back to where the truck is. And that's part of your test for diving too. You know, you have to use a compass and check where you're at. And I had a moment where I turned around and looked at this giant blue water. It's the first time I had been like, what? It's just surrounded by blue. So I came back to my friend's house and I painted a mural for him. This is my first mural, and this is part of the mural, but you can see that, let's see, right here is me swimming, and then right here is me diving. Thank you, everybody. Should I just move on?
Thank you, Mare. And now the artists and I, we're going to sit up here. I'll warm us up with a couple of questions, and then I hope many of you have questions that you want to ask. And we have just a little bit of time, and then we'll have a reception. Okay. So in all fairness, I feel it's a little bit like the dating game or something, where you have to ask everyone the same question. So I'm going to ask you a question that I asked the last panel. I think almost everyone's passport has just been deeply researched, very personal, and just requiring a lot of looking through documents, memories, histories. I want to know if anything surprised you. What surprised you? Anyone, you can go in any order. And if you, nothing, that's okay too.
I will say that I was surprised to know the origin of the word hippocampus in the brain. Like, I didn't realize that it was about hippocampus is sea monster. And it is so fascinating that you would call a part of your brain a sea monster. That's what I was surprised by.
So is it only you that has two sea monsters in your brain, or do we all?
We all do. And you know what sea monsters love to eat? Blueberries. That's the best thing you can eat for that. That's part of my research. That's the best thing you can eat to keep your hippocampus healthy.
Good to know.
I was just surprised to learn the details of the story of my family's migration. Again, I knew that a lot of people had these stories, and just the idea of horseback was really compelling to me. I'm like, that wasn't that long ago, and they're riding across horses and calling people peckerwoods, and like it's an old history that feels close, and like I know the people that they're talking about, and so yeah, that whole thing just was, I don't know, bringing that history to life for me. So that was a surprising.
So was
find.
the stolen horse new to you with this project?
Yeah, I didn't know about the horse, and he went to a judge, because Indian Territory was before it became Oklahoma, and he actually got his horse back. So a black man got a stolen horse back from a white man in 1900. That shocked me.
Yeah. That is shocking.
And so, yeah, all these little pieces of the story, and it's really fascinating.
I mean, I think the thing that I found surprising, they're all things that I shouldn't have found surprising, which is why I'm hesitating. But the thing that I found surprising was learning, and I still want to know more about this because of my aforementioned time crunch. I couldn't do proper research into this because it turns out when you try to find out about artists who are forgers, you get a lot about art forgeries, even with professional librarian help. And so, but I was fascinated by the idea that, again, not surprised and yet surprised by the idea that people who have skills to make things make what is necessary when the time calls for it. And so what was striking to me was that people who in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam, either couldn't get out or didn't get out, or maybe themselves were not at risk until they began doing this forging activity or were at risk for other reasons. I was fascinated that it seems that multiple artists in the city became forgers, and this is a piece of what they did. And then so part of the research took me to this person who I talk about, who's mentioned super briefly in the film, but actually was interviewed and has I'm completely, of course, blanking on her name right now, but has a very long oral history interview in a series of archival interviews from that Holocaust. And one of the things that she begins to sort of unfurl is the story of the group of people they were a sort of cadre of people who were doing these forgeries, most of whom were queer, many of whom were artists, one of whom was a fashion designer who designed the police uniforms and made them that allowed them to pass as the police to go in and do this thing. And when they were rounded up, he insisted on wearing a pink shirt. Now, I'm gonna cry. He insisted on wearing a pink shirt so that when they were shot and dumped in a mass grave, he'd be able to be found later. So I think these stories to me, like, when people know what's coming for them and still do stuff, and this is instructive, I would argue, for us, I think they're important stories to learn, right? So to me, like, and being able to get at the level of detail that's available in histories, whether they're, personal stories of our family that we didn't have access to, right? I'm really struck by both of you having these letters, right? Anyway, but yeah, so I think that was the thing that was surprising to me, is also just that we can still access that level of detail. It's not just about heroics or about someone who wants to be a superhero. It's just like people doing everyday stuff. And that everydayness is deeply, deeply important. To remember is also everyday, right? It doesn't make you a hero to have done that.
Thank you. I feel like there should be another chapter on your book, though, because shouldn't we be making forgeries of your book
Yes.
to bring it to its full conclusion?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Please do.
I think so.
Everyone. Yes.
Such a Baudrillard question.
Sandra, did you have anything to add?
Yeah. Well, I was actually very surprised how going through all these memories affected me. Like how, I was crying when I was feeling my mother's pain when I was making the book, when I was thinking about the book. And this is something that I thought that I had resolved, something that I thought I have dealt with, and I couldn't believe it. And again, going back to the generational trauma, I was thinking that when she was going through all that she was going, she was pregnant with me. So I guess that all her sadness was being how do you say that? Channeled, thank you. Channeled to me. So after, 60 years that I made this book, I felt her pain, and it was devastating. So I was surprised that, I could feel that. And I actually felt even more compassion and love for my mom that I hadn't felt before. So I'm glad that I was able to make this book for her, and that she was able to see it, and that she understood how I love her, and how a full circle.
That's really beautiful. Thank you. Does anybody have a question? Yes. Cole, were we going to pass a mic back?
We're out of microphone.
I can be heard, no problem. I have to admit, as a historian who studied African American history, I have to know more details about your grandfather's success. That's an extraordinary story that he got his horseback.
Yeah, because that's the front of the letter. The second part of the letter says that he got the horse back. Yeah, I think it's because they were in Indian territory and not in a state of the Union maybe yet. there was a little wiggle room, and he was able to get it back. That's all I know. I could ask my mom when I get home, but so far that's the only details that I know. And they made it across, and eventually made it to Chicago from there. And it seems like an astounding story, but it's a story of so many people. Just the resilience of Black folks in general it's amazing to me.
Yes. Maria has a question.
I'll yell out here. It seems like a through line for all of you is that you have such a beautiful way of channeling your grief, not only your personal grief, but your ancestors' grief, your people who came before you, whether it's chosen family or birth family. You have such a beautiful way of channeling that grief through your art. How do you handle that grief on the day-to-day, and how do you fuel it into your art? I think that's the most powerful work that you're doing, and I think artists, that all of you are making me cry, because that's what I want to do with my art too. So one, thank you for what you're doing, and two, how do you keep moving forward?
So I just want to repeat, the question is about how do you channel your grief, and complimenting how they've done it through this project, and how do you go forward?
Go ahead.
Actually, my art has been my safe, I'm out of words right now. My safety. Making art has been, to me, like my lifesaver. My work is very personal, and since the beginning, I've been documenting and relating a personal story that it is universal, because I know that a lot of us go through similar things. So for me, it has been what has helped me get through things, get through life. Yeah, I guess that's in short.
Yeah, I think finding letterpress and getting to own a printing press has been my way of expressing things. I'm generally a quiet person. Even when I was printing, I didn't know until I started making work that I had all this in me to say. So even when I first had my first show, people were kind of astounded, like, where did all this stuff come from? And it's like, I don't know. I guess I've just been holding on to it. And so for me, printing is the perfect vehicle for outrage and grief and telling the most specific personal story and putting it out there. And then so many people say, oh my God, I'm so glad you printed that. That's me. How did you know? And it's amazing how often that happens. And so it's a way for me to be in community with people and share things. And so, yeah, it's something that I have to do.
I mean, I think the two books I made right before this book were both like very literally about grief, and I worried a lot that it was like they were also, well, one was also well researched, I would say, but I worried a lot that it did not make sense for me to put those stories out into the world, because they really were mine, and I did not know if they would create, points of reference for others. At the same time, I think doing the work, so in a personal sense, doing the work gave me a place to be with it, right, as opposed to losing my mind, which was also happening, to be totally frank. But it also allowed me to continue a relationship in those books, to continue a relationship or figure out where a relationship could go, that now I was doing on my own, right? With this book, I think, it's interesting to hear you use that word grief, because I think the idea of what, for me, again, personally with this book, I would be grieving is having been taught so many things that are violent, and then doing the work of unlearning those things, right? And I say that as a person who's speaking from a position of a fair amount of privilege in a country where my particular race, class, and national privilege, as I said when I was talking, has a huge impact on what I'd be able to do with my life, and I know that comes from somewhere. And so for me, I don't think it's sufficient for me to then be sad about that, right? That would be deeply insufficient, violent even. But I think that there's something deeply compelling then about having a place to work through those questions with others, even though those others in many cases are the books I'm reading, the people I'm having conversations with. So that book in particular is filled with quotes, and the colophon tries to speak to where that text comes from. And it's really about the things I learned that were both about violence, like the violence of white supremacy, or the violence of the privileges that I hold, like essentially the idea that I have rights to things, and then the ways that I unlearn those things, right? And that's obviously a constant process. So for me, that feels personally like it's slightly less about my grief and more about my rage or that process. But I do think that the notion that I have been taught things like it is important to protect your own at the expense of others, right? And I don't mean like a person in my life taught me that. I mean like history taught me that, or the books I read taught me that, or whatever. To understand later that how much that cost me for however many years until I learned differently, that to me I think is a piece of grief that gets worked out from being like, oh look, all these people are asking this question, all these people are trying to teach people things. So I think there's both the like personal part of it, and then also what I would call the political part of it, or the historical part of it, or the social piece of it.
I think one of the driving forces for me for making things while I've been processing grief is as a visual learner, sometimes I don't have access to the words that correspond to what I'm feeling. And the only way I can access that language is by making something first. And so that's number one. By making, it's helping me process grief. It's helping me to understand what I'm feeling. Number two, there is nothing more, in my mind, there's nothing more universal than one person's story. We all are in this together, and we have all similar feelings and more commonalities than differences, I think, really. And also, I think that for me, the work that I'm doing now, I've come to learn that when somebody dies, it's like a library burns down. And I have made it my personal kind of mission of late to tell as many stories as I can to keep those people alive. That's how I'm processing it.
Thank you for that question. I think we should wrap up soon. If there's a burning question out there, yes.
My burning question is, I would love to know, Catherine, what your prompt was. One of you, I think it was you. Your names used to be up there. Now they are.
I'm Shana.
And I think you were the one who said you got such an amazing prompt from Catherine, and you had an adjective with it that I can't remember. Was it slippery or?
Yeah.
Yeah, slippery.
Yes.
And so I just joined a writing group for the first time in my life this year. And we have been writing stories, which are amazing. We're just ordinary people.
Okay. So are we.
Ordinary and extraordinary at the same time.
Anyway, maybe you could speak to that. What was the prompt that was so great?
Slippery.
Slippery in a good way. I mean, the prompt was, here are two things about the prompt that I found super helpful, and then the slippery part. So the prompt was actually in some ways very straightforward, to make a book that was about migration or borders or movement, not necessarily about people, not necessarily about states and nation states, right? So to construct that in any number of ways, which I think we've all done in different ways, definitely in the show. And then there was and if you might consider kind of prompt, I think that was roughly how you phrased it, it would be great if you might consider sort of working in the form of the passport. And what was great about that was because the passport, I think, for me, as you saw, is a really complex document. It's a document that for me is, as I've said 1,000 times now, layered with privilege, but also a place of pretty intense vulnerability for me. So that when I'm told it needs to be my real ID, and part of the real ID is the gender piece of it, there's a sense in which I know that I am required to carry this document so that I can have the relatively smooth passage I am assured on every other level, which I can problematize all I want, but I still have that privilege. While at the same time, that very document, in the way that it's adjudicated in this country, renders me non-existent. So that book, which is like in my backpack somewhere, because I'm traveling right now and I need it to get around, has all that stuff embedded in it. So for me, the slipperiness was built into a thing I think about all the time, which is both that relationship between my privilege and my vulnerability, or my precarity. But then also I think the slipperiness of time. And so what was amazing about the prompt was that Catherine gave us a couple of great examples to look at, and then also was like, but also do whatever you want. And so it was so open and so precise at the same time that having the like, okay, well, what would it look like? So the size of my books are exactly a little bit too small there is actually a formal passport size that's regulated internationally. So I made mine like 1/8 of an inch smaller on both sides, right? So it was just a way of kind of trying to mess with that. So having that two-part provocation of like, try to do this, but also do whatever you want, but try to address these themes. It was like an invitation to take up something that was probably sitting back here for a long time, but I don't know that I would have had the bravery to try to figure out how to put down. So it allowed me to invent something that I probably wouldn't have made otherwise, I don't think.
I just have to say that I was at a birthday party last night for my grandson, who's turned 23, and it was at the Slippery Pig Brewery in Hillsborough.
Amazing.
Does anyone else want to say anything about the prompt?
I just heard the word passport.
It's always good to have constraints, something to push up against, bounce up against, and so, yeah, using the passport as a form in that size, and so, yeah, my book is blue, but not passport blue. My flags aren't really American flags. My stamps are more stored. Yeah, just like, so it's just helpful to have somewhere to go versus you can do anything. That's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things I liked about this opportunity to exhibit these works and these commissions was that most of us have a passport. It's a book. We don't think of it really as a book. There's books of matches. There's purse books. There's all these things in our lives that are books that we're not used to thinking about. And I think a lot of book artists do think about that. It's intriguing for us. And so it seemed like something that we all are familiar with, but we get to reinvent in a new way and bring our own experience and histories or whatever that it was. I invited them to make passports for future space travel. Like, what would that look like? Like, I was so worried I wouldn't give them enough latitude. Like, I don't want you to think this is what you have to do. You can do anything, and I'm not sure I can think big enough. And I have to say, like, what came back was so astounding and so rich, and everyone, it just was amazing how everyone interpreted that. So thank you. Yeah, sure. I want to mention that there's one other program that's happening, I want to say February 3rd, Jenna, is that right? Curated Conversations with Mita Mahato. It might be February 4th, it's a Monday, and the first Monday of February. She's also one of the commissioned passport artists, and she will be here on the stage in conversation with Jenna. So she also has a new book out that's not part of what we asked for, but it is related. It's really intriguing and interesting. So if you want more of this, come the first week of February and hear Jenna and Mita Mahato in conversation. We're going to have a reception now, so you're going to have plenty of time to talk with these people, buy a catalog, have it signed. So enjoy yourselves. Thank you. Thanks for coming.